My fiancé proposed with a ring I'd secretly helped pay for. Hours later, I saw him text his brother. "The ring is tiny. Think I can guilt her into upgrading it?" I said nothing. I just contacted the jeweler, returned the ring, and got back most of the $8,500. When he met his brother the next day expecting to show off our engagement and discovered the ring was gone. My name is Maren Voss. I was 31 years old and worked as an accountant at a mid-size firm. It wasn't glamorous work, and nobody ever leaned forward at parties when I described what I did for a living, but it paid well enough, offered stability, and gave me a life I was proud of building. I made about $78,000 a year. Not wealthy, not struggling, just comfortable. My bills were paid, I had some savings, and if I wanted something expensive, I usually saved for it instead of putting it on a credit card and hoping future me would figure it out. That mindset was the reason I had spent the previous 8 months setting money aside. Most people would have spent that money on a trip or a newer car. I spent mine on a ring for Adrian. We had been together for 3 years. We met at a friend's wedding, exchanged numbers before the night ended, and somehow never stopped talking after that. 2 months later, we were officially together. A year and a half after that, we moved into an apartment. By the 3rd year, everyone around us seemed to assume a proposal was coming. Even Adrian joked about it. Whenever friends teased us about marriage, he would grin and say, "She's taking her sweet time." I'd laugh along because I knew he was joking. At least I thought I did. Looking back now, there were probably more warning signs than I wanted to admit. Not huge red flags, nothing obvious. Just little moments that felt harmless at the time. His older brother got engaged about 6 months before everything happened. His fiancée worked in finance, came from a wealthy family, and bought him a ring that became the center of attention everywhere they went. People wanted to see it, photograph it, talk about it. At family dinners, it somehow became part of every conversation. I noticed Adrian paying attention. Not obsessively, just enough that I remembered it later. His eyes would drift toward the ring whenever somebody complimented it. He'd laugh along with everyone else, but there was always something thoughtful in his expression afterward. I assumed it was normal. Who wouldn't notice? Looking back, I realized he wasn't just noticing it. He was measuring himself against it. I just didn't realize he had crossed that line. When I started shopping for a ring, I approached it the same way I approached everything important. Slowly, carefully. I spent weeks researching diamonds, settings, and pricing. I spoke with jewelers, learned enough about cut and clarity to hold a conversation with professionals without sounding completely lost. Eventually, I found exactly what I wanted. A 0.75 carat oval diamond with excellent cut quality, set in white gold. The jeweler helped me modify the setting so the stone looked elegant without feeling flashy. It wasn't the biggest ring in the display case. It wasn't supposed to be. What mattered to me was that it felt thoughtful, personal, beautiful. The final price came to $8,500. For some people, that might not sound like much. For me, it represented months of planning, sacrifices, and discipline. I still remember signing the paperwork. My hand actually shook a little. I didn't regret it. My hand shook because the moment felt important. I wasn't buying jewelry. I was buying a future. The jeweler smiled when she handed me the box. "He's going to love it," I smiled back. "I think so too." I truly believed that. A few weeks later, on a Saturday evening in October, Adrian proposed. What most people didn't know was that I had quietly contributed most of the money for the ring. He had been dealing with some financial setbacks, and I wanted to help without making him feel embarrassed. To me, it wasn't about who paid for the ring. It was about building a future together. That evening, he took me to dinner, then suggested a walk through a small riverside park we both loved. Halfway across the bridge, he stopped. At first, I thought he was joking. Then he reached into his pocket. His hands were shaking. His voice was shaking too. He told me he loved me. He told me he couldn't imagine his life without me. Then he got down on one knee. I started crying before he even finished asking. Of course I said yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger. We hugged. We laughed. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly the way I had imagined. Then he looked at the ring. The change was tiny. So small I almost missed it. A flicker. A hesitation. The briefest pause before the smile returned. If it had happened to someone else, I probably wouldn't have noticed. But when you love someone, you learn their expressions the way other people learn songs. You know when a smile is genuine. You know when something is off. The moment lasted less than a second. I convinced myself it meant nothing. He admired the ring on my hand, called his family, took pictures, showed everyone the engagement photos. The evening continued exactly the way an engagement night should. Yet that brief look stayed with me. The next morning, I woke up early and went into the kitchen to make coffee. Adrian was still asleep. His phone sat on the counter. As I walked past, the screen lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop. I didn't even stop at first. Then I saw the notification preview, a message from his brother. "So, did you talk to her about upgrading?" I froze. For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. Then I read it again. My stomach dropped. The phone was unlocked. The conversation was already open. I picked it up. What I found took less than 30 seconds to read, and somehow managed to erase 3 years of certainty. The messages started the night before. Adrian, I proposed. Brother, finally. Brother, show me the ring. Adrian sent a photo. Brother, oh. Brother, that's it? Adrian, I know. Brother, after 3 years? Brother, that's what she came up with? Adrian, I'm trying not to be disappointed. Adrian, you saw the ring your fiancé got you. Brother, can you get her to upgrade? Adrian, maybe. Adrian, I'll work on her. Adrian, she's easy to guilt. Then came the message from that morning. Brother, so did you talk to her about upgrading? I stood there staring at the screen while the coffee machine hissed behind me. My hands felt numb. The money wasn't what bothered me. And honestly, even wanting a larger ring wasn't the real issue. What hurt was how casually he talked about me. She's easy to guilt. The sentence since replayed in my head over and over. I thought about every late night I spent researching, every dollar I saved, every decision I made while planning that proposal. I thought about the way he had cried when I said yes. Then I thought about those texts. The gap between those two versions of him suddenly felt enormous. Eventually, I put the phone back exactly where it had been. Made coffee. Sat down at the table. 20 minutes later, Adrian walked into the kitchen smiling. The ring sparkled on my hand. I still can't believe we're engaged, he said. I forced a smile. Me neither. He started talking about venues, guest lists, photos, the future. I listened, nodded, answered when necessary. But something inside me had already shifted. By the time the sun went down that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even shocked. I was calm. And that frightened me more than anything, because calm wasn't my first reaction. It was the reaction that came after I made a decision. I spent the rest of the night sitting beside the man I thought I was going to marry. And while he planned our wedding, I quietly began planning my exit. Monday morning felt completely ordinary from the outside. I got dressed, drove to work, answered emails, reviewed reports, sat through 2 meetings that I barely remember now. Nobody looked at me and thought, there's a woman quietly dismantling her future during her lunch break. To everyone else, I was just Marin, the dependable accountant, the woman who always submitted her work on time, the woman who never brought personal drama into the office. Inside, though, I felt like someone had reached into my life and shifted everything a few inches to the left. Nothing looked dramatically different, yet nothing felt the same. Around noon, I sat alone in my car and pulled up the receipt for the ring. $8,500. The number stared back at me. Strangely, it wasn't the amount that hurt. It was remembering everything attached to it. The weekends I stayed home instead of spending money. The vacation I postponed. The laptop I told myself could wait another year. The dozens of small choices nobody ever saw. Sacrifices don't feel like sacrifices when they're made for someone you love. At least not in the moment. They feel like investments. You imagine a future version of yourself looking back and being grateful you cared enough to make them. The painful part wasn't that Adrian disliked the ring. The painful part was realizing he never seemed to recognize what it represented. To him, it seemed like a piece of jewelry. To me, it represented 8 months of planning and sacrifice. I called the jeweler shortly after. The woman who answered recognized my name immediately. Hi, Marin, how's engaged life? The question caught me off guard. For a second, I almost answered automatically. Then reality returned. Actually, I said quietly, that's why I'm calling. There was a pause. A short one, long enough for her to understand. By the end of the conversation, we had worked out the details. The diamond could be returned. The setting was a little more complicated because of the customization. After fees and adjustments, I would get back $8,095. Not the full amount. Close enough. The problem wasn't the refund. The problem was getting the ring back. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking through possibilities. Part of me hated that I was even doing this. I wasn't doubting myself. I hated having to think this way about someone I had trusted for 3 years. Love isn't supposed to feel like planning an extraction. Yet there I was, making lists, thinking ahead, preparing. That evening, Adrian came home excited. The irony almost made me laugh. I had spent the day figuring out how to end our engagement. He spent the day looking at wedding venues. He sat beside me on the couch and started showing me pictures. Ballrooms, gardens, historic hotels, Places that looked beautiful and expensive. Look at this one, he said. I glanced at the screen. It looks nice. Imagine the photos. The photos. Not the ceremony. Not the marriage. The photos. I noticed little things now that I never would have noticed before. Not because he had changed. Because I had. When trust cracks, your perspective changes with it. You start hearing things differently. Seeing things differently. Connecting dots you previously ignored. Maybe those dots mean nothing. Maybe they mean everything. The hardest part is figuring out which is which. The next day, Adrian went to dinner with his brother. The same brother who had helped turn our engagement into a conversation about upgrades. As he got ready to leave, he kissed my forehead. Don't stay up waiting for me. I won't. After he left, I stood in the apartment for several minutes doing absolutely nothing. The silence felt strange. Not lonely. Not peaceful. Just honest. For the first time in days, there was nobody around me pretending everything was fine. I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase, then another. I wasn't moving out. Not yet. I was protecting myself. Important documents went in first. Passport, financial records, insurance paperwork. Then my laptop, a week's worth of clothes. A few personal items I couldn't replace easily. I felt ridiculous doing it, like someone preparing for a storm that might never come. But breakups reveal things. Not always terrible things, just unexpected things. People become versions of themselves you've never met before. I wasn't planning for the worst. I was making sure I wasn't vulnerable if the worst happened. Around midnight, I drove everything to my friend's apartment. When he opened the door and saw the boxes, he looked from them to me, then back to the boxes. Bad? I nodded. Pretty bad. He stepped aside. Come in. That was all he said. No interrogation. No advice. No attempt to fix anything. The older I get, the more I appreciate people who understand that support doesn't always require a speech. Sometimes it just requires space. After I left his place, I drove home alone. The city looked different at night. Traffic was lighter. The streets quieter. My grandmother used to tell me something when I was younger. Whenever I got my heart broken, failed a test, or lost something important, she'd shrug and say, "Life charges tuition." At the time, I thought it was a strange thing to say. Now I understood. Some lessons are expensive, not because of the money involved, because of what they force you to accept. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I already knew what I was going to do. The only thing left was timing. And for that, I needed one thing: the ring. Wednesday morning arrived with an odd sense of calm. Not happiness, not relief, just certainty. For days, I had been carrying the weight of a decision by myself. Once a decision is made, something changes. The fear doesn't disappear completely, but it loses its grip. I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed the opportunity. Adrian was in a great mood. He walked around the kitchen talking about lunch plans with his brother while I drank coffee and listened. Apparently, they were finally getting together to celebrate the engagement properly. His brother wanted to see the ring on my hand in person. Take photos. Talk wedding plans. The whole thing felt almost absurd. A week earlier, I would have found it sweet. Now it felt like watching someone make plans for a future that no longer existed. As he adjusted his jacket, he glanced down at his hand. "Actually," he said, "can I see the ring for a second?" I looked up. For a second, neither of us spoke. The moment had arrived much sooner than I expected. About that. His smile faded slightly. What about it? I placed my coffee mug down. The sound seemed unusually loud. I returned it. At first, he laughed. Not because he thought it was funny, because his brain rejected the information. People do that when reality arrives in a form they weren't expecting. "Okay," he said, "seriously." "I am serious." The smile disappeared. "What do you mean you returned it?" "I took it back to the jeweler yesterday." The silence that followed stretched between us. I watched confusion move across his face, then disbelief, then concern, then something closer to fear. "You returned the ring?" "Our ring. Marin." "The engagement is over." For a moment, he just stared. I could almost see him trying to rearrange the conversation into something that made sense. A misunderstanding. A joke. A temporary argument. Anything except what was actually happening. "What are you talking about?" I met his eyes. I saw the messages. The color drained from his face immediately. That told me everything. People can argue with accusations. They can deny assumptions. But recognition is difficult to fake. What messages? The conversation with your brother. Neither of us moved. The one where you called the ring tiny. His shoulders stiffened. The one where you said you'd work on me. A flicker crossed his face. The one where you said I was easy to guilt. The room went quiet. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren passed. A dog barked. Life continued normally. Meanwhile, the future we'd spent years discussing was collapsing in my kitchen. "You read my phone." Of all the possible responses, that was the one he chose. Not the texts, not the insults, the phone. I almost smiled. I'd already expected that response. When the notification popped up, your phone was unlocked. You still shouldn't have read it. Maybe. I nodded. But that's not really the issue here. His jaw tightened. I could see him searching for an explanation that sounded better than the truth. The problem was that the truth had already been written down. Words become difficult to escape once somebody reads them. I was venting. The explanation came quickly. Too quickly. Venting? Yes. He stepped closer. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? His eyes shifted away. For the first time since the conversation started, he looked uncertain. It wasn't really about the ring. I waited. Eventually he sighed. My brother has always had more than me. There it was. Not the ring. Not the proposal. Something much older. The better house. He looked toward the window. The better job. Better vacations. Better everything. His voice sounded tired now. Then he gets engaged and everyone spends months talking about that ring. I stayed silent. I knew people would notice mine too. His laugh was bitter, and I knew exactly what would happen. For the first time, I saw something genuine beneath the defensiveness. Not entitlement. Not manipulation. Insecurity. The kind that grows slowly over years until it starts affecting things that have nothing to do with the original wound. Part of me felt sorry for him. I really did. Listening to him, I realized how much energy he had spent looking sideways. At his brother. At other people. At what they had. Maybe that's why nothing ever felt like enough. I understand why it bothered you. His head lifted. Hope flickered across his face. Then I continued. But that doesn't make this okay. The hope disappeared. Because understanding and agreement aren't the same thing. You can understand why somebody did something without accepting it. Understanding him didn't change how I felt. I was disappointed for 5 minutes. His voice rose slightly. You're ending 3 years over 5 minutes? No. I shook my head. I'm ending 3 years because of what those 5 minutes revealed. The words landed harder than I intended. He knew it too. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, he stopped arguing. Stopped defending. Stopped searching for loopholes. The fight seemed to leave him all at once. What if I apologize? The question sounded smaller than anything he'd said so far. I looked at him carefully. An apology matters. It should matter. But apologies don't magically restore the version of someone you thought existed. Once a curtain is pulled back, you can't convince yourself it was never there. I think you're sorry. His eyes widened. Then why? I think you're sorry because you lost something important. The sentence stopped him. And maybe you're sorry for what you said. I paused. But neither of those things changes what I learned. Silence settled between us again. This time it felt heavier. Not angry. Final. The kind of silence that appears when both people realize there isn't a path back to where they started. After a while, Adrian lowered himself into a chair. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. What happens now? I looked around the apartment. The couch we'd picked out together. The pictures on the wall. The kitchen table where we'd spent hundreds of ordinary evenings. For years, I thought heartbreak meant losing a person. Sitting there, I realized something else. Part of heartbreak is losing the future you built around them. The plans, the assumptions, the version of your life that felt guaranteed. That's the part nobody talks about. The morning begins before anything is physically gone. I took a slow breath, then answered, I think it's time for us to let each other go. After I told Adrian it was time to let each other go, neither of us spoke. The apartment felt strangely unchanged. The couch was still where we'd placed it. The framed photos still hung on the wall. His coffee mug sat beside the sink. My jacket remained draped across the dining chair. Everything looked exactly the same, yet the room felt completely different. It's strange how quickly certainty can disappear. One conversation doesn't erase 3 years, but it can change the way you see all 3 of them. Adrian stared down at the floor. His hands were clasped together. For once, he wasn't trying to persuade me. Wasn't trying to explain. Wasn't trying to win. He simply looked tired. So that's it? His voice was quiet. I nodded. I think so. He let out a slow breath. 3 years. Neither of us said the number out loud, but it seemed to fill the room anyway. 3 years of routines. 3 years of shared holidays. 3 years of grocery lists, movie nights, birthdays, road trips, and ordinary Tuesdays. Looking back, it wasn't really one conversation that ended us. That conversation just forced me to admit what I had been avoiding. That conversation didn't create the problem. It just forced me to stop ignoring it. Adrian rubbed his forehead. I honestly never thought this would happen. I didn't either. That part was true. A week earlier, I had been looking at wedding planning spreadsheets. Now I was discussing how our relationship would end. Life can change direction faster than people realize. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then he looked up. I wish you'd talk to me. The comment surprised me. A small laugh escaped before I could stop it. Really? His expression tightened. You know what I mean. No, Adrian. I shook my head. I don't. He looked away. I would have explained. The answer came out softer than before. Less defensive. More honest. Maybe because he knew explanations no longer carried the same weight. I studied him for a moment. Then I said the things I'd been thinking for days. If you felt insecure, you could have told me. His eyes lifted. If seeing your brother get attention bothered you, you could have told me. He stayed silent. If you felt embarrassed, disappointed, jealous, frustrated, any of it, you could have talked to me. The room grew quiet again. Eventually he nodded. I know. And for the first time since this started, I believed him. Not because he was asking for forgiveness. Because he sounded disappointed in himself. That's a very different thing. People often regret consequences. Fewer people regret their behavior. The distinction matters. I didn't want to sound pathetic. His voice barely rose above a whisper. The confession caught me off guard. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded real. I sat back. I don't think that would have sounded pathetic. A sad smile touched his face. Maybe not. For a few seconds, we simply sat there. Not as fiancés. Not even really as a couple anymore. Just two people finally having a conversation that probably should have happened months ago. Then reality returned. Practical reality. The kind nobody thinks about when relationships end. The apartment. The lease. The furniture. The logistics. Those things don't disappear simply because the emotions become complicated. What do we do about the apartment? He asked. The question felt almost comforting. Simple. Concrete. Something we could actually solve. The lease ends in 3 months. He nodded. I know. I'll cover the full rent for the next 2 months if you want to find a place sooner. His eyes widened. You'd do that? I don't want a war, Adrian. That was the truth. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want screaming matches. I didn't want mutual friends choosing sides. I just wanted out. The older I get, the less appealing conflict becomes. Peace starts looking far more valuable than being right. He looked around the room. I guess I should stay with my parents for a few days. That might be a good idea. The words sounded strange. A week ago, we had been discussing wedding venues. Now we were discussing temporary living arrangements. Life rarely gives you time to adjust. It simply moves forward and expects you to keep up. Around 6 that evening, Adrian finally stood. The conversation seemed finished, not resolved. Just finished. The conversation was over, even if nothing felt resolved. Some endings work that way. Some endings simply arrive when both people realize there's nothing left to argue about. He walked into the bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard drawers opening, closet doors sliding, suitcases being pulled from storage. The sounds hit me harder than I expected. For days, I'd been functioning on adrenaline. Planning, thinking, preparing. Now that everything was actually happening, the reality finally caught up with me. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window. And suddenly I remembered the first time Adrian stayed over at my apartment. The first vacation we took together. The night we signed our lease. The day we assembled furniture for 6 straight hours and nearly broke up over bookshelf instructions. I smiled despite myself. Some memories hurt because they're bad. Others hurt because they were genuinely good. Those are often the hardest ones to carry. An hour later, Adrian returned to the living room with an overnight bag. He looked exhausted, emotionally exhausted. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't really fix. I'm going to my parents' place. I nodded. Okay. He hesitated, then looked around the apartment one last time. I never thought I'd leave like this. Neither had I. For a second, neither of us knew what to say. Then he moved towards the front door. His hand rested on the handle. Just before leaving, he turned back toward me. There was something vulnerable in his expression now. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Can I ask you something? Sure. His eyes held mine. Did you ever really love me? The question hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because I couldn't believe he still needed to ask. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I'd spent 3 years loving. The man I'd planned a future with. The man who had somehow become a stranger and familiar at the same time. Then I answered honestly. Enough to buy the ring. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Not dramatic tears. Not manipulative tears. Just sadness. Pure sadness. The kind that arrives when reality finally settles in. For a moment I thought he might say something else. He didn't. Instead he nodded, opened the door, and walked out. The lock clicked softly behind him. Then there was silence. Real silence. Not the comfortable kind we used to share while reading separate books in the same room. This silence felt unfamiliar. The apartment suddenly seemed much larger. I stood there for several minutes doing nothing at all. Just listening. Eventually, I sat on the couch and stared at the empty cushion beside me. I expected anger, or relief, or even tears. Instead, I felt something much stranger: grief. Not for the relationship we had, for the future I thought we were going to have. And as I sat there alone, I realized that future was already gone. The only thing left now was learning how to live without it. The first few days after Adrian left felt unreal. Not dramatic. Not devastating in the way movies usually portray breakups. Just strange. I would wake up every morning and forget for a few seconds. Then I'd roll over and see the empty side of the bed, the missing phone charger, the absence of his shoes near the door, and reality would settle in again. Not all at once. Just enough to remind me that my life had changed. The apartment felt bigger now. Not because anything about it had physically changed, because there was less life inside it, less movement, less noise. For 3 years, every routine had included another person. Now every routine belonged only to me. The first weekend was the hardest. Not because anything happened, because nothing happened. Nobody asked what I wanted for dinner. Nobody suggested a movie. Nobody wandered into the kitchen while I was cooking and stole pieces of food off my plate. The silence wasn't painful. It was unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things always feel larger than they really are. 3 days later, Adrian's mother called. I stared at the screen before answering. Part of me already knew how the conversation would go. She had always been deeply involved in her son's lives. Opinionated. Protective. The kind of parent who genuinely believed she was helping even when she was making things worse. Hello? Marin. No greeting. No small talk. Just my name, followed by a sigh. I closed my eyes. Here we go. I heard what happened. I'm sure you did. What you're doing is a mistake. The certainty in her voice almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because people are often most confident when discussing situations they only partially understand. My son is devastated. I walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, traffic moved through the intersection below. People carried coffee, talked on phones, laughed. The world continued completely unaware of the conversation taking place in my apartment. I didn't want him to be hurt. Then why would you do this? The question sounded simple, but it wasn't, because there wasn't one answer. There were dozens. Trust, disappointment, the texts, the manipulation. The realization that the person I thought I knew wasn't exactly who I believed he was. Yet none of those explanations would matter. She wasn't calling to understand. She was calling to change my mind. He made one mistake. I leaned against the counter. He didn't accidentally send those messages. A pause followed. Then another sigh. Everyone says things they don't mean. Maybe. Sometimes they do. But sometimes people mean exactly what they say. The only difference is whether they expected anyone else to hear it. For the next 15 minutes, she tried every angle she could find. 3 years together. The engagement. How much Adrian loved me. How devastated he was. How relationships require forgiveness. Eventually, I stopped responding and simply listened. Not because she was convincing me, because I understood where she was coming from. She wasn't defending a situation. She was defending her son. Most parents would. The problem was that understanding her didn't change anything. When the conversation finally ended, she sounded disappointed. I probably did too. Neither of us got what we wanted. Before hanging up, she said something unexpected. I really thought you two would make it. I looked around the apartment. The empty chair. The missing coat. The half-cleared bookshelf. So did I. Then I ended the call. That night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. The city stretched out below me in every direction. Thousands of lights. Thousands of apartments. Thousands of people dealing with problems nobody else could see. For a long time, I just sat there thinking, not about the ring, not about the breakup, about expectations. The strange things we build inside our heads. When you love someone, you slowly create a picture of the future. You don't even realize you're doing it. You imagine future holidays, future conversations, future versions of yourselves growing older together. Then one day something happens, and suddenly you realize the future you've been carrying around only existed in your imagination. That's what hurt most. Not losing Adrian. Losing certainty. Losing the version of life I thought was waiting for me. About a week later, Adrian texted. The first message since he moved out. I stared at the notification longer than I expected, then opened it. I found some of your books and clothes in my car. Do you want me to drop them off? Simple. Practical. Almost painfully normal. I typed back. Porch is fine. Thanks. Then another message appeared. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I read the sentence several times. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was finally being honest with himself. Maybe he just hated how everything ended. At that point, it didn't matter. The answer wouldn't change anything. I put my phone down without responding. Not because I wanted to punish him, Because there wasn't anything left to discuss. The chapter had already ended. A response wouldn't reopen the relationship. It would only prolong the goodbye. The next afternoon, I found the box sitting on my porch. Books. Clothes. A charger I forgot I owned. Tiny pieces of a life that no longer existed. I carried everything inside and placed the box in the living room. Then I sat on the couch and looked around the apartment. For the first time in weeks, I noticed something surprising. I felt okay. Not great. Not healed. But okay. The sharp edges had started to dull. The constant replaying had started to slow. The future still looked different than I expected. But it no longer looked ruined. Just different. The refund money remained untouched in my savings account. $8,095. Months earlier, that money represented a proposal, a wedding, a future. Now it represented a decision. A reminder of the moment I chose not to ignore what was right in front of me. Looking back, the lesson wasn't about jewelry. It wasn't even about money. It was about paying attention. Because when somebody shows you how they see you, believing them the first time can save you years of heartache later. The breakup cost me 3 years and $405. Considering the alternative, I still think I got the better deal. The following Saturday, I woke up later than usual. Sunlight was pouring through the bedroom windows. For a moment, before my eyes fully opened, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. And something unexpected happened. The memory no longer knocked the air out of me. It was still there. Still sad. Still disappointing. But it didn't have the same weight. That surprised me. For weeks, I had been convinced healing would arrive dramatically. That one day I'd wake up and suddenly feel different. Stronger. Over it. Finished. Instead, it happened quietly. Almost invisibly. Like noticing a bruise doesn't hurt as much when you press it. The bruise is still there. It just isn't controlling your entire day anymore. I made coffee and sat by the window. The city was busy. People rushed to work. Couples walked dogs. Families carried groceries. Life kept moving. The funny thing about heartbreak is realizing the world never pauses for it. At first, that feels unfair. Later, it becomes comforting. Because eventually, you understand that if life keeps moving, you can too. A few weeks passed. Then a month. The apartment slowly started feeling like mine again. Not ours. Mine. I rearranged furniture. Bought a different lamp. Changed things that had remained untouched for years. Small changes. Nothing dramatic. But every adjustment helped. I wasn't trying to erase what happened. I was trying to stop living inside it. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old photograph. It had been taken during our second year together. Adrian had his arm around my shoulders. We were smiling. Happy. Really happy. I stared at the picture for a long time. Then something occurred to me. For months, I kept trying to decide which version of Adrian was real. The man in the photograph, or the man in those text messages. Eventually, I realized they were the same person. That was the part I struggled with the most. The problem wasn't that Adrian had secretly been a terrible person. The problem was that the part of him driven by insecurity eventually became stronger than the part of him that appreciated what he already had. And by the time he realized it, the damage was done. I placed the photograph back in the drawer. Not because I hated it. Not because I wanted to forget. Because I no longer needed to keep staring at it. Some memories deserve a place in your life. They just don't deserve control over it. Several months later, a mutual friend invited me to a birthday party. At first, I almost declined. Then I changed my mind. Avoiding life had never helped anyone heal. So I went. The restaurant was crowded. Music played softly in the background. People laughed, talked, ordered drinks. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Then I saw Adrian, across the room. For a second, time seemed to slow. Seeing him didn't bring back old feelings. It just reminded me how much of my future used to include him. It's impossible to completely erase that kind of history. He saw me too. Our eyes met briefly. Then he walked over. Neither of us looked nervous. Neither of us looked angry. Just older somehow. Life has a way of doing that. Hey. A small smile appeared on his face. You look good. Thanks. So do you. And he did. Not happier. Not sadder. Just different. The conversation stayed light. Work. Friends. Normal things. At one point, there was a pause. Then he looked down briefly before speaking. I was an idiot. The words caught me off guard. Not because I disagreed. Because they arrived without excuses. Without explanations. Without conditions. Just honesty. I laughed softly. A little. He laughed too. Then shook his head. A lot. For the first time in a very long time, the memory didn't hurt. It simply existed. Like an old scar. Evidence of something that happened. Not something still happening. A few minutes later, someone called his name from across the room. He nodded toward me. It was good seeing you. You too. Then he walked away. And that was it. No dramatic reunion. No reconciliation. No sudden realization that we belong together. Real life rarely works that way. Sometimes closure isn't getting someone back. Sometimes closure is realizing you don't want them back. I left the party later that night and walked toward my car. The air was cool. The city lights reflected off the pavement. For a moment, I thought about the ring again. Not with bitterness. Not with regret. Just perspective. Years earlier, I believed that ring represented the beginning of my future. Now I understood something different. For a long time, I thought returning that ring marked the end of something important. Looking back, it feels more like a turning point. I stopped explaining away things that hurt me. I stopped convincing myself that effort would automatically be appreciated. And for the first time in a long while, I trusted what I already knew. Looking back, it was the best money I ever lost.